So, Michelle just published a new book and is on a book tour in the UK. So we were very lucky to have her here today. So if you want to, the floor is yours.
So, I mean, you see my bio, I'm a little bit of a polymath because I'm professor maritime, a documentary photographer, I'm an author, but I'm also a copyright lawyer, which I did somewhere in between all those things, so I could teach copyright law to our design students. And I just finished a master's in international affairs because I was kind of curious about policy, since so many of the things that documentary photographers photograph involve that kind of stuff. So anyway, as Kirsten said, I just finished a book, documentary photography. We considered it was published by Bloomsbury. And this quote sort of encapsulates a lot of the ideas of the book, which photography has the ability to document, but also to distort and reshape the world it records. The documentary photographer yields a power of social construction over who or that which is represented and how it's represented. Some of those ideas are actually going to be the subject of this very short talk. In her seminal text on photography, Susan Sontag wrote, "Photographs furnish evidence, something we think about, something we hear about but doubt seems proven when we're shown a photograph of it." This is true regardless of the significance of the photograph. It can be a moment of joy, a simple moment of joy, as this photograph is, or it can be a photograph of evidence of atrocity from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Even though Sontag wrote this about film-based photography, and scholars have written volumes about questioning the veracity and vicissitudes of the photograph, particularly the digital photograph, generally viewers still believe that photographs provide a certain kind of evidence. And that's the first problem I want to talk about. This belief in the evidentiary nature of photograph underscores our reliance on photographs for historical record and is the basis for our collective memory of the 19th and 20th century. And I'm here talking specifically about collective public memory. And to explain a little bit, collective public memory is a memory based on publicly available symbols, in this case photographs, that are maintained by society. We view an event or an image, but we view it through our own experiences and our own belief systems, and that impacts our experience of the event, but also how we view the photograph, and then our future shared memory of the same event. Particularly in the 20th century, we came to rely on the photograph as experience. We might say, I've seen that, but you haven't seen it, you've only seen a photograph of it. But we don't often distinguish between an actual memory of something we've experienced as opposed to a memory of something that we saw, a photograph that we saw as an event that we might have talked about with our friends. So this is a kind of collective public memory. And photographs play a pivotal role in creating collective public memory because they are shared visual communications of the past. They're anchored in the present, but they're often viewed collectively in the future. Photographs influence memory because as humans, we have a far better memory for images and for words. Brain studies prove that we form the neural connections that allow us to encode visual information far more effectively and far faster than we form the neural connections need to encode text. There were some interesting studies where they showed volunteers to say 1,000 photographs, and they had them remember 1,000 words, and a few days later, about 5 days later, they asked them to recall both the words and the photographs, and they recalled the words they recalled the photographs with almost 90% accuracy, not so much the words. Now that makes kind of a sense from an evolutionary point of view. You would survive if you could remember uncharted land or which plant was poisonous. So our brains remember photographs, remember visual information, which is one of the reasons that photographs have become so, one of the reasons we rely on photographs for a historical memory. Photographs and memories also share similar characteristics. Memories are the effects of our past experience on our present selves, And photographs are information about the past that we perceive in the present and save for the future. Both memories and photographs are temporal. Just as memory compresses seconds, days, years, and decades into a single moment, the documentary photograph squeezes time, seconds, days, years, decades into a single still image. But this raises the second problem. Assuming that an image has not been altered in post-production, the photograph is evidence of that fraction of a second that's actually in the photographic frame. But it's not the truth. It's only a snippet of truth. You know, the world doesn't have edges. Only the photographic frame has edges. But photography has always traded on its mimetic promise, that is, its ability to capture what was there, nothing more, nothing less. But just as with memory, the photograph is not purely mimetic. It leaves out details, as I think Larry was talking about. It rewrites reality based on the photographer's choice of lens, focal length, point of view, and framing. The simple act of pointing here and not pointing there changes what we might understand the situation to be. Memory also leaves out details. Memories are just as imperfect renditions of the past as photographs are. We rewrite memories all the time. Memory is not static. Memory is dynamic. So we're constantly rewriting our memories and reinterpreting them, just as we reinterpret photographs. What we see in the frame of a memory or a photograph reflects all sorts of mediations. What was happening just outside the frame? What was happening, what had happened minutes before, or even hours before or after? While the photograph may be fixed, at least the negative, the film negative may be fixed, its meaning is fluid. Every photograph does have a story to tell. Every photograph has a secret to share and memories to bring forth. But the question we have to ask in the 21st century is whose stories and what secrets? So this reliance on photographs as evidence of a past event, which we consider to be our memory of that event, is problematic in the 21st century because we now know how profoundly manipulative all photography can be, even photographs that aren't manipulated. We understand notions of gaze, be it colonial or male, and we grasp how inaccurate our knowledge of a culture is when that knowledge has been based primarily on photographs made by outsiders. Africa is perhaps the most impacted and misunderstood culture based on common historical record and even contemporary photographic record. And I say understood by Westerners, obviously not by Africans. The Western view of Africa constructed through 19th and 20th century images is that of a place of conflict, disease, poverty, and game animals. This skewed perspective is being successfully challenged today by the increasing numbers of African photographers and photographs available to everyone in part through the ubiquity of social media and the uncovering of archives. Projects such as Everyday Africa, available on Instagram, seeks to reframe the collective memory of the African continent by combating Western cliches with images from African photographers who find meaning in the flux of the everyday. Their Africa is a place far more complex and nuanced than the one so commonly imaged by Western photographers in the past, and to some extent, still today. And this is just a random screenshot of Everyday Africa. Women Photograph is an initiative, it's a database launched in 2017 by photojournalist Daniela Zaltzman to elevate the voices of women who's visual journalists, so it not only challenges the colonial gaze, but the male gaze. She started it because she was having a meeting with Kathy Riley of the New York Times magazine, prestigious, and she said, "You don't publish enough women." And Kathy Riley says, "Well, I would, but I just don't know them." So Daniela created Women Photograph. It now has a database of about 900 photographers, all of whom are women from all over the world. I only give that as a little background because I love it. She's like, "You don't think there's women photographers? I'll show you the women photographers." Its database also has 100 women living and working in Africa. So I'm showing you a random selection here. So this is what the database looks like. It's, it's a photographer where they are, just a random selection, but they're all living and working in Africa. A young photographer one of the photographers on her side, I just like these images, Yagazi Emezi, and I am sure I'm mispronouncing the name. She focuses primarily, she lives in Nigeria, she focuses primarily on stories about African women and their health, sexuality, education, and human rights. Not the pictures that we're used to seeing. Go back here for a second. The problem with relying on photographs as memory is that these sometimes false and often inaccurate memories disturb the present moment and contemporary cultural landscape. For example, anyone with a knowledge of photographic history, when thinking of the Democratic Republic of Congo, or just then Congo, probably thinks of this Alice Seeley Harris's image of King Leopold's Belgium, King Leopold's Congo. Or maybe all the work that photojournalist Marcus Bleasdale did in Africa, including in Congo. But these memories conflate historical or past moments. But I think more seriously, the problem is that they also can conflate our idea of contemporary, let's say Congo, if we don't see the other kinds of images. And that's the paradox of photography and memory. The Congo today is not Alice Seeley Harris's Congo, nor is it Joseph Conrad's Congo in the heart of darkness. Its citizens are not the primitive, deranged, and defeated ones that Conrad portrays as being easily manipulated by Mr. Kurtz. The banks of the nearly 3,000-mile-long Congo River are teeming with villages, towns, and the modern city of Kinshasa. It's Congo, not Alice Seeley Harris's Congo. The photograph has been termed a mirror with a memory, but as we reconsider documentary work from a post-colonial perspective, we have to ask whose mirror, what reflection, and whose memory. This question is critical when we consider images of all marginalized groups that have been the subject of a dominant history and a colonial power that has tried to excise, degrade, and silence them. For example, Lee Ura, she's also listed on Daniela Saltzman. She's a young photographer working out of Goma. Shows us a different Democratic Republic of Congo than the one of Seeley Harris or Bleasdale. This is not to suggest necessarily that the other images are inaccurate depictions of that thousandth of a second captured in that photographic frame, but they're just a snippet of truth. So what then is our collective memory then and now of Africa? For example, as Westerners, is it common knowledge that there was a black middle class, say, in 19th century South Africa? We know that now because of archive photographs. And eventually this may rewrite our memories. In fact, there's been a rise in the use of photographic archives, because they're rich with photographs as memory, because they're actually private moments not meant to be seen publicly. And these private images matter as much as the ones we are intended to see that dominate the historical narrative. It is through archives that we can recall and revisit both individual and collective memory. One such project, the Black Photo Album, by distinguished South African photographer Santu Mofokeng, whatever, M-O-F-O-K-E-N-G, because I can't pronounce it, contains private 19th century portraits commissioned by black South African working in middle-class families during apartheid, which of course the United Nations has labeled a crime against humanity. As with all family albums, some families guarded their album as a treasure, while others were not even sure who the people photographed were. They just knew they were ancestors. Santu writes, in some families, they are coveted as treasures, displacing totems in a discursive narrative about identity, lineage, and personality, while in others, he says, they lay hidden to rot through neglect in kists, cupboards, cardboard boxes, and plastic bags. At a time when the government designated blacks still as natives, the images reveal a very different historical narrative. The portraits are painterly, with the artifice of Victorian studio photography. The subjects usually sit or stand, often in front of a painted backdrop, sometimes propped with floral arrangements or as if the images were taken in someone's Victorian sitting room. Some images are clearly fiction, obviously because the attire and props are incongruous, probably chosen by the photographer. There's only a couple photographs in his entire project where someone is imaged sort of in a working environment. The subjects all seem willing participants, donning costumes. They wear suits with waistcoats, watch fobs, top hats, and walking sticks for the men. The women wear white billowy blouses, long skirts, lace-up shoes, and parasols. The costumes project an image, if not how the subjects were, how they wanted to be seen. In one early 1900 albumen print, a man identified as Elliot Fakang poses in front, leans on a balustrade that appears to be at the top of a staircase. But if you look closely, you can see that it's actually made of paper mache, and it doesn't actually go anywhere. And if we look more closely at some of them, you can see that the clothes don't quite fit, like his pants are rolled up. So we know that they donned these as costumes. The images suggest people with history, identity, aspirations, and goals, not people living lives of poverty and despair as is commonly depicted in colonial photographs. The people photographed were staking claims to forms of identity and culture, to ways of being in the world that the keepers of South Africa's racial order sought to reserve only for whites. In donning these clothes and holding these props, they were not only displaying bourgeois respectability, but also asserting urbanity, modernity, pride against a society that sought to consign them to a static past. However, we wouldn't know any of this if the archives had not been discovered and, more importantly, published in a book. I highly recommend it if you can find it. It's called The Black Photo Album. But they're also a little problematic because they're private photographs and they initially existed in a completely different context. They've literally been stripped from the photo albums and torn from their original context, often without even identifying names. Because he only has the names if people wrote them in their photo albums. And although the images are not manipulated, and as a moment in time, we can certainly take them as evidence of a thriving urban middle class in apartheid South Africa at the turn of the century, they are still out of context. We can't say with certainty why they were taken. Who commissioned them? Who chose the clothes, the props, the place? What did the process represent to the subjects? And as the photographer is not identified, that anonymity begs the question, was the photographer black or white? If the photographer was white, what role did that play in the artificiality of the clothes, the Victorian artifice that was being presented? Were the choices of clothes limited to attire more common in portraits of white Victorians because it was a white photographer? In other words, were these black South African people commissioning a photograph have chosen to dress themselves as white Victorians? Does it even matter? They were willing participants in the commissioning of the photograph. But just as photography has skewed our collective memories of Africa, the power of shared social media is altering it. We have the privilege of seeing work from young photographers such as Kadara Anisi, who redefined selfies and the black body in art, or Sarah Waswa, born in Uganda but now based in Kenya, who explores what it means to be African today, or Ethiopian-born artist Ida Mulune, whose project, the 99 series, explores identity and memory. She writes, pulled between the past, the present, and the future, we wrap ourselves with forgotten heritage and we dream of looking towards the future, but we are stuck looking into the past. And I would say that is an apt description of some photography. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay. Do we have any questions?
Yes.
I'm still searching for an answer really to what does decolonization mean in relation to making a photograph, or in relation to an archive or a collection? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think that I would have to, and I apologize, it's the lawyer in me, would have to ask you who's making the photograph and what kind of archive. So I think decolonizing the Black Photo Album, it pulls photographs out, it changes an understanding of perhaps what 19th century South Africa looked like. Now, that doesn't decolonize the photograph so much, but it might decolonize our memory of that time. You know, in taking a photograph, I think it's got to be who are you and what are you photographing. And I also have to say, I don't believe that no outsider can ever take a photograph and have it mean something, because then I would have to photograph white middle-aged women. So I think it's intent, and if I would talk about it in my book, I do talk about it. The intent of the photographer, I think, is really pivotal. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, partially. If I may just explain.
Yeah, please, because it's a very tough question.
It's a very. I work in the heritage sector, and this word is proliferating. You know, everybody's, and I've got a kind of fairly simplistic understanding of it. And the reason for that is because I was born in a colonial territory which gained independence. Mm-hmm. So decolonization means to me ceding power or territory, or there's some kind of negotiation of power. What I don't understand when it's invoked in relation to aspects of heritage is how that aspect of it seems not to be there, that there's other meanings of decolonization apart from ceding power.
I have two things. One, I think I never used the word decolonize.
No, not you.
But deliberately.
The seminar is titled this.
Deliberately. But I think that everyday Africa, if you want to talk about ceding power, if the only photographs we ever had, or we ever knew, were mostly taken by white Westerners, usually affluent ones, because who else could travel? And now a project like Everyday Africa, which is coming out of Africa, which is all people living and working in Africa, becomes how we image a place. We have actually, in a sense, ceded power as a society. We've said, we're going to believe this more than we're going to believe that. So I think it's I think ceding power might be an actually interesting way to think about decolonizing. No, I like that. I think I might just even take that. Other questions? Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.